Hey, welcome back. If you understand money, then you already know the system is broken. Ricardo Salinas lays out exactly why fiat is theft, why freedom requires responsibility, and why Bitcoin is no longer optional for anyone serious about protecting their wealth. So what's interesting about Salinas is he's actually woken up to the fact that he's advocating and recognizing Bitcoin as that appeal, that asset appeal, to safeguard himself and his heirs, if you like, and his fortune against the entropy, against the inflation, against the shenanigans committed by governments and fiat run state. And this is why I felt that what he has to say is rather interesting, because it's very rare to see a baby boomer to even recognize that Bitcoin is slowly but surely superseding or replacing what they've grown up to understand it as hard money, which was gold at that time. But ever since Bitcoin came to be, to its inception back in 2009, even the older generation, the baby boomers, are waking up to the fact that they need to do something before it's too late. And this is what this gentleman has done. So I'm going to go through a few key points, which I just want to bring it, as I said, to your attention, because we should treat this as lessons learned from a baby boom individual. It could be our parents, right? I'm a Gen X and my parents are baby boomers like Salinas, so it's rather interesting what he has to say. So I want to start off with going back to what he feels is why freedom requires morality. Because it's true, if we have to go back to basics, because without freedom there isn't that moral foundation to front chaos, to front entropy, to front the wrongdoings committed by governments, entities, or even other parties, right? Other individuals. Because without it, we can't assure ourselves of our investments, which is pretty much what the democratic system is meant to behave, right? Which it isn't at the moment. I think we can all agree to it, because it's run by governments and they have their own personal agenda. If it was truly democratic, if it was truly sovereign, you need to really go back to morality. You need to go back to basics. And that is the key point that I think Salinas has been trying to make, because he has learnt through his own personal experience how Salinas was orange pilled early on, if you compare with his other baby boomer peers, right? Which is quite rare for these individuals from the early generations to even wake up and say, listen, we need to do something here, right? This is getting out of control. And what's interesting about Salinas leveraging his own experience, he's actually witnessed at first hand the disasters of big government in Cuba, Nicaragua and Mexico in its day. And this was his orange pill moment, because he was a businessman, he had businesses to run. As with most entrepreneurs, the ones that are successful are the ones that have actually committed huge failures during their business trajectory, where companies have gone bust, or they have to actually find a way to turn around the situation of the companies to one of success. So that, I think, was what Salinas has been trying to explain. That was his orange pill moment as to why he scratched his head and resorted to Bitcoin. So that was his light bulb moment as the only true solution to his problems. So really, I mean, it was very interesting, his take that governments worldwide are on the same bloated path. What is that bloated path? One of entropy, one of greed, one of totalitarian, one of let's steal through taxation, through inflation and money printing, which is what they're really good at, because they own the keys to manipulate those money printing press, to print out money, to inject the extra cash into the economy, thereby, the predicament is obvious. Stealth tax, which is inflation. That is the bloated path. Whereas on the other hand, if you want to kind of escape from that, the only way to do that, besides, of course, holding your fortune, your fiat fortune to Bitcoin, is we all need to strive for that smaller, rather decentralized systems in order to create that more resilient citizenship. And Bitcoin is that path. I think that was an interesting moment where he made that painfully clear. And even more so, given his experiences in life, escaping from this totalitarian regime, from the disasters of big government, in the cited countries that he's mentioned, and why fiat is truly corrupt. It goes against what was meant to be freedom for citizens in order to gain prosperity rather than being enslaved and overly dependent on the nanny state, which is the government, the fiat world, right? That was his point. Which moves into the next interesting segue on responsibility, restraint, and freedom. Whether you're religious or not is indifferent, and I agree with Salinas on that. If we go back, we can all agree that what I'm about to say, it's followed as a basic moral ethical principle, which is thou shalt not steal, and certainly thou shalt not kill thy neighbor, right? So we shouldn't steal and we shouldn't do any harm. That's the base premise. That is the baseline. I'm not talking about religion. We're talking about basic moral ethics, basic moral principles in life. Don't steal and don't harm. Because collectivists reject this with wealth confiscation masked as social policy. Whereas Bitcoin, on the other hand, fosters more of an honest interaction. No centralized theft, no arbitrary seizure. That is, I think, what Salinas has been trying to explain through responsibility, restraint, and freedom at the individual sovereign level, which is rather interesting. And I like the next point where he mentioned about there's really two choices in life on how you can earn your wealth, earn a living. You can either work, so that is integrity, that is proof of work, or you steal. Let's say we've all seen the Matrix movie where Morpheus have offered a blue pill or a red pill to Keanu Reeves, the character in the movie. Why is that an important analogy? Because it's true, the way Salinas explained it. You can take the blue pill or the red pill. There's only two choices. So by offering these two paths, we can all do the right thing and work for a living, or steal, which is the wrong side of the debate, but part as the enslaved fiat world, right? Because there are other factors that are just simply beyond our control. I've talked about it already. Inflation, entropy, the shenanigans. So when governments make arbitrary policy decisions without our knowledge or awareness, that is what I meant by being slaves to the fiat system, to the Keynesian economics, if you have studied that. That is what he tried to explain. So that is the majority of us have opted for that path, because we always like to be protected by the fiat system, by governments, right? In order to protect ourselves from a security standpoint, to give us education, to be able to give us social security, and also our pension scheme, which is a fallacy, right? Which is why people have opted for a private pension scheme or other ways to invest in order to create themselves a sizable cushion for their retirement, and less so for the future generations after the baby boomers, let's say. So that is the enslaved system, but there is another path, of which is what Salinas tried to explain, which is on the right side of the path, we need to be more courageous. We need to be able to build prosperity and wealth through that proof of work mechanism, through that integrity, through earning your wage, earning your living, earning your business in a more ethical, moral basis, right? And also invest some of that into Bitcoin. By doing that, we're not going to be slaves no more. And I liked that analogy of the Matrix movie being offered a blue pill or a red pill, because depending on which of the two you take, you can continue to become that slave. And unfortunately, if not the majority, have opted for that comfortable cage approach, the slave approach, which is, I think, is the wrong choice. But that's how the majority have born into that system. Whereas if we take the other pill, which is the pill to freedom, to morality, to truth, to sovereignty and wealth and protection, well, that is the right path. And the solution there, coming from the horse's mouth, Salinas, is Bitcoin, is the ultimate and only solution there is. And why Bitcoin certainly allows you to exit fiat abuse by holding on to your sovereign assets and relocate your wealth without borders. because we need to get rid of ourselves from fear. We need to become more immune to the shenanigans, to those arbitrary policy decisions made by the political leaders in any country under a big nanny state, under a big government state run system. Because we don't know, we will never ever know what is the personal hidden agenda of these political leaders, unfortunately, right? Even though they claim, particularly during the electoral campaigns, if you live in a democratic system where they throw out candy and pledges and promises, it's all a lie, right? It's a fallacy. He also made a mention that one of the answers that he usually gets from people when he goes onto this trail and explain the value proposition of Bitcoin, why people should start taking it more seriously and invest part of their wealth into their asset class. Well, he keeps getting the typical response, oh, we've got a bank account. You know, we're completely protected by the banks, right? They know what they're doing. It's their core business to protect our deposited cash holdings in the banks, and you know there's no problems because the governments will leave them alone. Of course, that is a complete and utter BS. It's a complete lie and a fallacy. And why is that? Because ultimately what we deposit in our bank accounts will be subsequently loaned out many times to its customers, because that's how banks make its money, through commission, through those loans that they lend out to others. And that is the point or response from Salinas to those individuals when he gets that kind of response, right? Because it's under a fractional reserve lending. That is what is meant by, you know, when you deposit your cash, it gets loaned out many times over, typically 1 to 20 times or even more, right? Depending on where you live in the world. That is what is known by fractional reserve lending. And that's how banks ultimately make their money, through commission, through loans. And they can do that. And in fact, whenever there is that financial crisis, remember the GFC, that was the last main one that took place not so long ago, 2008. We all have vivid memories because it has been a painful exercise. People have lost jobs, they've lost their wealth, they've lost their houses, they've lost their, you know, their hopes basically, right? All because of this fractional reserve lending business that actually was the ultimate driver and cause for the last GFC crisis. And that is what Salinas attempted to explain, which I wholeheartedly agree, that banks are taking more risk because they know that who is the last lender of resort? The central bankers. We've seen it time and time again. It's the same old playbook from central banks to bail out commercial banks that find themselves in a rather sticky situation and need a bailout. And who's the one that paid those bailouts? It's us, citizens, through our taxes, through the public coffers that they have. So that's the reason why banks can take increasing levels of risks, because they always know that they can always go back to the lender of last resort, which are the central bankers. So that is pretty much what I like to tell you today, and I hopefully you found this episode an eye-opener and has helped you to wake up to the fact that you need to do something to safeguard your wealth, and particularly thinking about the next step is how on earth can I transfer part of my wealth, if not all of it, into the digital realm, predominantly Bitcoin. Well, you can do that as well. In his last clip, what he's trying to advocate is we should move away from using real estate investment for generating yield. We should use Bitcoin instead, because there are fewer risks involved in Bitcoin as opposed to real estate investment. And it's not just me saying it. I've made quite a few videos explaining the difference between investing into Bitcoin and real estate. And, you know, it's true. I mean, we should use real estate just as a place to live rather than to speculate. Because I'm thinking about, I have a son, he's 15 years old, and I live in Europe. And I think it's the same predicament elsewhere. Houses are extremely expensive because, as I said before, the reasons I mentioned, inflation, entropy, currency debasement, money printed by governments, central banks, it's increasingly making it more difficult for particularly the Gen Z generation to buy their first property. And my point there is, and this is what Salinas tried to explain in his last clip, we should not use real estate as that investment. We should only use it as a roof over our heads to live in, right? Not to speculate and create yield. Let's please put our thinking caps and think about not just ourselves in terms of generating our wealth for our own needs. We need to think about, for those of us who have children and they need to get onto the property ladder at some point, we're not going to make it easier by continue to invest into real estate, because it will push up the price even more, let alone through currency debasement, money printing, and so on. We will do ourselves a huge favor to them if we were to relinquish the real estate investments that we have in our portfolio and buy Bitcoin instead. And that is the point that Salinas was trying to explain. It will help everyone all round, not just to create yield for our wealth, but for that of our children, helping them to get onto the property ladder as a first-time buyer. So that is all I'd like to share with you today, incidentally. If you found today's episode interesting, please don't forget to hit the like button, to share the video to colleagues, friends and family. And if you haven't done so already, to please subscribe to my channel, as I regularly publish some interesting videos such as these, anything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain technology and the future of finance. So till next time.